This is the BBC.
Hello, these are your friends at Radio 2, where we have jingles. Yeah. This is called ID Mersey. It's got that Mersey sound.
88 to 91 FM. BBC Radio 2.
Okay, so it's confessions time, and here come the highlights of the week. This time, we had size of a cow, that's SIGHS, which doesn't work when written down. Scrum might say, we got Sinner in the bathroom, and we have And Your Bird Can Sing. These are this week's confessions. Simon and the Very Figure Collective. My misdemeanour took place some 24 years ago, and as I'm now approaching my 25th wedding anniversary, I feel the need to confess of my wrongdoing. In 1993, me and my husband Pete were city slickers, and we loved it. A young, vibrant couple with everything on our doorstep: restaurants, bars, cinema, theatre, world of excitement around every corner. We were enjoying life to the full and wondered why anyone would want children. When we found ourselves in the family way, and don't know how that happens, the city suddenly felt like the wrong place to bring up our child, and we longed to be in the countryside. Soon Pete managed to find a job in Hampshire, so we moved to a quaint but tiny chocolate box cottage on a 6-month short-term rent whilst we decided where to buy. The house had a thatched roof, a small garden, and was surrounded by a farmer's field, a home of a herd of black and white cows. It was perfect. The house was heated by an old Rayburn stove in the kitchen. However, once fired up, it was red hot to touch. On our first night, I decided to head to the local supermarket and top up on supplies. Pete was in charge of our son, who was now crawling, and being the eagle-eyed mother who seemed to now see every danger within a 5-mile radius, I warned him once again about the stove. This was about to be our first visit to A&S, otherwise known as Accident and Stupidity. Pete had suddenly become distracted by the football results on the television when Nottingham Forest had gone 1-0 up against his beloved Chelsea. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw our son heading towards the stove. But in his rush to stop him, Pete, who's 6'4", by the way, had forgotten that he now lived in a low-ceiling chocolate box cottage. He promptly whacked his head on the archway to the kitchen and knocked himself out. Therefore, when I returned home, I found our son crawling over his dazed and bleeding father. Who was looking after who? Anyway, a trip to the hospital and stitches were in order. Needless to say, I was not happy at Pete's parenting skills that night. However, after a few months, I forgave him. After a few months. How about that? And we settled into our new life in rural Hampshire pretty quickly. The evenings would be spent in the garden, pushing our son on his swing, which in turns made the cows in the adjoining field curious, so much so that they would amble over to the fence to watch what was going on. Pete began feeding them tufts of grass, and very soon he had a favourite cow, which he named Daisy. Got to the stage when Pete arrived home from work, Daisy would be waiting for him at the fence for a pat, as in,
Yes.
that kind of pat, and some freshly picked grass. He would actually spend 10 minutes talking to a cow before drifting in to see his family. I would watch from the kitchen window, observing Pete wooing his newfound love. Then one night, Pete was in his usual spot, pushing our son on the swing, while being watched by the slightly curious herd. I shouted out of the kitchen for Pete to pick me some rhubarb. He duly obliged by picking several stems and breaking off the large glossy leaves. He then walked to the fence and started to feed Daisy and the rest of the cows the rhubarb leaves, before returning to the kitchen to give me the stems. "You sure you should have done that?" I said. "Aren't they poisonous?" Pete's face drained of colour. He'd gone from happiness to devastation within seconds and was now scrambling through his childhood set of Encyclopaedia Britannicas to check it out. OMG, as we used to say back in the 80s.
No, we didn't.
They are. I'm going to wipe out the entire herd. He sat with his head in his hands. His love of his life, Daisy, had eaten the most, and he was responsible. Tried to assure Pete it would probably be fine, and eventually he went to bed feeling slightly better. But when he got out of bed the next morning, Pete opened the curtains to see an empty field, absolutely bereft of cows. He quickly got dressed and rushed down to the garden, scaled the picket fence and stood alone in the field where the love of his life had once stared back. He stood there for quite some time before drifting off to work. in a somewhat downbeat mood. When Pete arrived home that evening, he was still looking sad and dejected, and as soon as he was through the door, he said, "What happened? Are the cars okay? Have you found out?" "Not really," I replied. "The farmer is livid. You wiped out 3 of his cows, and the rest are being treated by the vet. If I were you, I'd stay out of his way." My husband looked devastated, went totally silent. When I tried to offer him his favourite steak and chips for dinner, he mumbled something about his appetite having gone, and he wandered off to the study.
Steak.
Steak and chips. Very
Really?
sensitive, Sarah, huh? Still chips. But it is here. Always helps. It's here, Father Simon, that I have to confess, I do know what actually happened to the cows. I had in fact spoken to the farmer the previous afternoon, and he'd mentioned that he was moving his entire herd to another field early the next morning. I was reminded of this a few hours later when the evening sun was shining through the kitchen window and reflecting on the scar on Pete's head, obtained, you may remember, that night, excuse me, with the football scores, the stove and the low ceiling. And it was then that the mischievous plan had formed. Excuse me, 1 minute. Just having a cup of tea. Builds tension, don't you
Yeah,
find?
it does. Yeah, worked.
Thanks. It was then that thanks for your concern.
No, really.
It was then a mischievous plan formed. When I told the farmer a few days later what I'd done, he actually saw the funny side. He suggested that we continued to wind Pete up. In fact, weeks went by where the farmer would look the other way if he saw my husband coming. And eventually, Daisy became a forbidden subject between me and my husband, and my jokes or references were not appreciated. Eventually, the tenancy on the house ended, and we purchased a new house in the neighbouring village in a normal road with other houses and no cows. Somehow, 25 years have passed, and I've never got round to revealing the truth to my husband. And now I finally feel the need to spill the beans and come clean. To this day, Pete still believes he wiped out several cows. And ever since then, he rarely eats beef or even rhubarb crumble. So all the cows were fine, and it's taken 25 years of misery for Sarah to get round. Why didn't you? I don't quite understand why. It was, it was quite funny after a couple of days, Sarah. Then you could have said, "Oh, by the way, everything's fine. Steak and chips with a rhubarb compote afterwards." Sister Bobby, what do you think?
It's not a compote then. I thought a rhubarb compote. No?
I don't think it's a compote.
I
Is,
just,
that,
yeah.
is that what you say?
In our household, yeah.
What do you say, Matt?
Anyway.
When it's served by your so-called wife?
It's served by my wife and would be, I don't know, I've never had it.
Stewed
You know-
rhubarb. Anyway, moving
Stewed
on.
rhubarb.
Sarah, I think this was a bit of a ruse to get more rhubarb to yourself and more steak to yourself. I actually feel sorry for Pete because he obviously developed a relationship with Daisy, which is, cows are lovely, they have friends, they have a best cow friend, and obviously the Daisy developed a best person friend. They do, it's proven they have the best mate in the field. And Daisy's best mate in the field was Pete. And I think Pete was very upset, and I think that's very, very sad. And so Sarah, on this occasion, although it was a great jape, you are not forgiven
It would
for
be-
the pain you caused Pete.
It would be compote if there was an accent on the E, but without the E, it's a compote, surely.
Surely
It's a
that would be the
debate.
case.
Anyway, Brother Matthew. what do you say?
I am going to say, it sounds to me like Sarah's just a little bit jealous of Daisy the cow.
I think that's right.
Getting all the attention from hubby when he's out with mini hubby so on the swings and coming back. Why is he spending so much time talking to the cow? And so she hatches this plan. And I think it's actually, I think it's a very well orchestrated plan. I'm a big fan. I think the cherry on top of the cake is then deciding, sorry about you wiping out all the cows, fancy a steak. Brilliant. Excellent. Love it. Well done. I am going to forgive, of course.
BBC Radio 2.
Simon and the Juggernauts. That's a band. I have a confession from 15 years ago, which I feel I need to share and seek humble forgiveness. I was a member of a rugby club in the southwest that were very, very amateur. To give you an idea, we played in a pub league on Sundays, and sometimes we ended up in the pub that we were supposed to be playing for last orders on Saturday, just for efficiency, you understand. Team bonding was important for us, and one of our annual traditions was a trip away to a player team from further afield. One year it was suggested we should be a bit more adventurous with our plans and look abroad. So we decided to promote international relations by playing the beautiful game of rugby in foreign climes. After a brief period of deliberation, it was decided that we should visit the amazing sights of southern Spain, specifically Benidorm. I can't remember how we ended up at that conclusion. As this was apparently my idea, I was put in charge of the tour arrangements. Flights were booked. We were due to leave one Friday in late May for a weekend of hard drinking, fun and stupidity and a game of rugby.
Who thought? Yeah, big shock.
It's most unusual,
Yes,
isn't it? Really?
never happens.
I had around 6 months to organise this game, 6 months to organise one game, and thought it would be easiest to go through the Spanish RFU and ask them, Rugby Football Union, and ask them to put us in touch with clubs across the Costa Blanca to try and arrange a match. A very friendly official, let's call him Jose, offered his... Well, why not?
Why not?
Offered his assistance organising the games. Not wanting to look a gift horse in the mouth, I explained to Jose that the game was of extreme importance as we needed to undertake some hot weather condition training in order to remain at our peak level of fitness. Now, I may also have mentioned that some of our players needed match time in the hope of getting an international call-up in time for the 2003 World Cup. On reflection, I may have given Jose the impression that we're a little more of a big deal than we actually were. However, I thought it necessary at the time to secure an all-important game. Then 3 weeks before the tour, Jose contacted me to say he'd made all the arrangements for a game only 45 minutes from Benidorm, and he would actually arrange a coach to collect us from our hotel on the Sunday morning. What a star this man was proving to be. Well, the tour started well, with the international law of drinking at airports at 6 a.m. kicking things off nicely. Is that a law?
No.
I asked around in the office. Turns out apparently it is.
Is it?
But
Really?
anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Followed by a day of fun and, yes, more drinking throughout Friday. I'm only mentioning this because it is relevant to where we're ending up. On Saturday, we visited the local water park, got asked to leave for reasons which can be left to another confession, and then headed out into the town for another night of hydration and team bonding. The night went on and we were enjoying the hospitality of the local bars and clubs, and before we knew it, the night was coming to an end, and leaving the nightclub, thought it was getting a bit light, and realised it was 6 a.m, which meant we were due to be picked up in less than 4 hours to play a game of rugby. Well, Father Simon, there seemed little point in going to bed, so we went back to the hotel to grab some breakfast and try and work out exactly how we were going to get through the day. The team met in the reception of the hotel for 10 a.m, and sure enough, a coach pulled up outside, and some people in suits started disembarking. 6 of them, in fact, followed by someone dressed in regalia, which looked, well, I imagine, was the kind of thing that a Spanish mayor would wear. And this turned out to be because he was a Spanish mayor.
Of course.
Apparently, my slight overplaying of the importance of our rugby club to Jose from the Spanish RFU had led to a, shall we say, breakdown in communications, and it transpired that our welcome party were the president of the Spanish Rugby Football Union, the local mayor, the sports minister for Costa Blanca, and other such dignitaries. It seemed that they were under the impression we were a National League Two side, not a County League Two side, some 26 divisions apart. That's 26 divisions lower down.
Okay.
The look on their face when they were met with a group of not at all professional rugby players, most of whom were in their 40s and 50s, was pained, confused and bewildered. So not wanting to be held responsible for a tour without a game, I suddenly sobered up and met our welcome party with complete confidence, got the team on the bus and headed out of Benidorm to play the team of expats that I presumed Jose had organised. Well, we pulled up at a very grand-looking stadium, much more impressive than the rough-cut patches of turf we were used to. We disembarked the bus and noticed there was a large stand in the ground, which contained a few hundred seats, many of which had actual people in them.
Oh, no.
Plus, the guys warming up looked quite good.
Oh, dear.
And young, and fit, and well-rested, and sober. It turned out we were lining up against the Spanish under-23 national team.
Yeah.
To put this further into perspective, the average age of our team was 38, staying below 40 thanks mainly to 2 19-year-olds. Our props, though, were both 45. Almost all of the team were what would be considered to be unfit, and we had our oldest tour party member, our 78-year-old club president, starting at scrum half.
78. Yeah.
A scrum half, ladies and gentlemen, who is 78 years old. Oh, my word. After much bemusement on the faces of the 600-plus crowd who'd come to watch this titanic mismatch, we got into the changing rooms, got kitted up and headed out. I wish I could tell you that the bravery with which we defended our line and took the game to these well-tuned, fit, young, very hard rugby players. And we did, of course, for all 11 seconds until they scored their first try. We lost 106-0. And that was only because we had to stop after 55 minutes because we were incapable of moving anymore.
Okay.
Game abandoned due to one side being hopeless. Father Simon, I'm seeking forgiveness not from my teammates who enjoyed the weekend massively and have a story to tell until their dying day, nor from our opponents, nor the mayor, nor the crowd who had actually paid to come and see this game. I would like to ask forgiveness from Jose, from the Spanish RFU for misleading him ever so slightly, and also from the sports editor of our local newspaper, who I spoke to on returning from Spain. You see, I'd relayed this story to him along with the photographic evidence to support the tale. These pictures may or may not have included a fake picture of the scoreboard, which showed that we won 21-16. Which he still believes to this day. Fake news.
What?
Fake sports news. So, this is a scandalous, outrageous tale, which ended up with lying to the local press. Anyway, Rob, on tour, they lost 106-0, game abandoned after 55 minutes. Lots of embarrassment all around. What japes? Bobby Pryor.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you provided such a fantastic... Well, I tell you what's difficult is this was such a fantastic trip for the club. I mean, it's like a heritage game, isn't it? It involves, all the players. So for the team, it was fantastic.
Heritage game, I like that.
Yeah, that's what it was. And the thing is, of course, the real person I feel really sorry for is Jose. Can he forgive you? I don't know. I think he should have been... No, I think it's difficult because he should have checked with you.
Imagine bumping into these guys at the airport. What would you think?
I would think you cannot be forgiven, Rob.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's fair on Jose. He did all that work for you.
Brother Matthew.
Yes, I think I'm going to forgive. And the reason why is, frankly, Jose at the Spanish RFU, I mean... Put it this way, if someone has called you up and said, we have got players coming in this team and some of them have got a chance of getting into the England team, bear in mind this is 2002 where the England rugby team are sweeping all before them. They're going to win the World Cup in a year's time. Martin Johnson, Johnny Wilkinson, Lawrence Lalia, all of those, and you've got Jose at the Spanish RFU who goes, oh yeah, those names sound... Bob, you say? Yeah, right, okay, he's probably going to get in the team, isn't he? It's because of Jose should have known that these players were not very good. And frankly, when they turned up and saw that there was a 78-year-old in the scrum half position, then clearly everyone realised what was going on. I love the fact that they changed the score. So it looks like...
Yeah, look, 21-16.
Yes, clearly. So I'm going to say forgiven because, you went along with it, didn't you? Although, yes.
You're such a rugby union type.
Obviously, that always comes across.
Dear Father Simon and the Collective, it was 1988, my last year of university, and I was sharing a house with 3 other girls. 2 of them were close friends I'd lived with the previous year, plus an unknown friend of a friend of a friend, who we'll call Alison, who we'd recruited to take the 4th room. For the first few months, we'd all got on well, taking it turns to cook, never vacuuming, and carefully monitoring the state of the cooker so we could ensure we moved long before it got to the moment where we had to clean it. In those days, I was very easygoing, some would say a bit wimpy, as I happily accepted that people, and by people I mean Alison, could use my milk, wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and invite strange men to sleep in our front room and use our phone as much as they liked. The phone bill gate incident aside, it was all part of the fun of university life, being 21 in late 80s Britain, fully funded by the taxpayer. Thank you very much, life was good. However, it's a truth universally acknowledged that if 4 girls live together, during the stress of university finals, then one girl must be selected to be slowly marginalised, edged out and generally blamed for everything. Unfortunately, the girl selected for this unassailable ritual was myself. As the year progressed, I began to notice conversations dry up when I entered the sitting room. I was left out of pub trips and I caught sidelong glances from Alison to the others when I spoke. I was baffled by my housemates' acceptance of Alison's divisive behaviour, but easygoing and enjoying a strong friend base outside the house, I just ignored it. Things relaxed when Alison began a relationship with a very affable and mature hippie called Greg. Greg had long auburn hair, a cheerful persona, played the guitar, and adored Alison. He would spend many evenings at our house with Alison, practicing their headbanging and anointing each other with patchouli oil.
Oh, lovely.
We've all done. I was going to say, no, we haven't.
No, we haven't.
After a short time, their relationship had deepened to the extent that they shared long and happy baths together, completely oblivious to other people's needs to use the bathroom. The other two girls moaned, but as I was easygoing, did I mention that? I didn't get involved. That is until Alison and Greg started using my soap from my own pink soap dish. Not only that, but they left it in the bath. Now, this wasn't just any soap. It was very expensive, hypoallergenic, non-drying Norwegian formula facial soap, which cost about £1.79 in 1988, which in current money is probably about £8. Anyway, it cost about 8 times more than ordinary soap. Key feature of this soap was its very high solubility, so leaving it in the bath while they toweled themselves dry and reapplied the patchouli oil at great length meant revolting.
Keep it together, everyone.
Meant all that was left to me was a sodden, disintegrating globule stuck to the bottom of the bath. The first time it happened, I shrugged, being easygoing. I saw my bank manager, bought another bar, and moved my soap dish to the top shelf, well away from the bath. But come their next bath time, which is just in a couple of days, because they're hippies, I once again found my expensive treat-yourself soap, globulized and useless, on the bottom of the bath. I shrugged and this time replaced the soap with a much cheaper alternative and positioned my soap dish still on the top shelf but temptingly at the front, whilst my third bar of expensive soap is hidden at the back. Suffice to say that many times over the next few weeks I retrieved my cheap soap bar from the bath and their ablutions and replaced it on the dish. It was a good buy, that soap bar. It lasted for ages, only ever being used by Alison and Greg. As the year drew to its close, Alison dumped Greg and returned to stirring trouble, but she continued to use my everlasting soap bar, which I continued to rescue from the bottom of the bath, always with an easygoing smile on my face. Although she was always very clean, I happily never saw her again when we all vacated the house in July 1988. Now, 30 years on, I must finally confess that the everlasting soap bar wasn't so much as a soap bar as a very special cleansing bar that had just appeared on the market. I further confess that it actually wasn't so much a cleansing bar as a solid and concentrated version of a washing powder. Marketed for the powerful removal of stubborn stains from your clothes. I think it might even have involved some powerful oxidizing action. Incidentally, still available today in the same very distinctive packaging. The brand name is very... no, I better not say that. Anyway. And so, therefore, here come the apologies. Well, with regard to Alison, even nearly 30 years on, no, not sorry. In fact, I'm glad. I tell you, I'm glad. For whatever reason, Alison appeared to have regularly mistaken my laundry bar, safely stored out of reach of children on a top shelf, for ordinary soap. Although in hindsight, I believe that stubborn stains is an appropriate metaphor for her impact on my enjoyment of my final year. Getting philosophical. My heartfelt apology, though, is to Greg. And only because after they broke up, I learnt that this mature bearded hippie, was in fact a good 5 years younger than us. So even though Greg was always with a responsible adult during his bath time, I have to apologise profusely for exposing his delicate young skin to potentially irritant chemicals. I can only sincerely hope that no long-term damage or sensitivity was sustained. I can see Bobby scribbling at that moment as the implications of exposing delicate young skin to a scouring agent, or whatever it was, is fully sinking in. Anyway, Sister Bobby, what do you think?
Rose, I don't think you really need forgiving, because also, even though it wasn't Greg's fault, he was also sharing the bath and he wasn't bringing his own soap. So Greg doesn't need forgiveness. Also, I think getting rid of stubborn stains was also part of Greg. You got rid of him as well, so congratulations.
Well, he might have been a nice person.
Also, well, no.
I think Alison was the stubborn
stain.
The
thing is, he's still using other people's soap. He's not using his own, is he? He's not bringing his own soap along. He's not paying for the hot water. He's still staying on the sofa when he shouldn't be. And the other thing is, Rose, is there's different ways of dealing with difficult people. You can confront them, or you can do what you did, which is just,
or
take
get
control.
out of my house.
Well, that's what, it's one of those things, grace and dignity and quietness at all times.
Is that
maybe.
right? You could have said,
"Where's my Snorkel.
Could have said that. Which usually gets you out of most things.
So I'm saying, Rose, don't need forgiveness, but if you need forgiveness, you are forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Well, what the worst could have happened with a scouring agent? Obviously, I'm not a chemist, but I'm going to say it was fine. And also, Greg, why aren't you bringing your own soap? What is this? Turn up, sleeping on the couch, and then you get in the bath and using all the hot water, and you're expecting to use the really nice soap? Ridiculous. However, I think if I was paying £8 for a bar of soap, I would, and I was living in a student house, I would be keeping that in my room. I wouldn't. We all know what the rules are.
So it's Rosie's fault.
So yeah, actually, in student housing, don't have anything in the communal because it all gets used. I know my tomato ketchup was getting used all the time. Ridiculous. Thankfully, I'm over that. But I'm going to say forgiven.
BBC Radio 2.
Darren says, Dear Father Simon, and he says duo of divine deliberation, but it's a trio actually today because, of course, the novice is in, what with it being Raw Steak Day.
Perfect. We should have a day for that. Should be a whole week of that, shouldn't
Always everyone's favourite if you're a lion.
And Darren's already...
Or a tiger, or a cheetah, or something like that, but not a human being.
Well, we'll talk about that. won't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, Darren says,
I'm here, Darren, by the way. Yes, three of us.
I need to take you back to the summer of 1984 when, having recently acquired my much-coveted teenager status, I now felt I had the freedom to explore the four corners of the world all by myself. I would spend hours outside making dodgy ramps from broken planks of wood, or playing squash football against the garage wall, or simply just hanging around with my three friends, Danny, John and Michael. Now, as you can imagine, if you take four teenage boys in the middle of puberty with testosterone flying around everywhere, you end up with four very, very competitive characters. And what in the world is more competitive between four lads of this age? That's right, ornithology. Yes, exactly right. You see, the four of us lived in villages that were surrounded by the rural flatlands of Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, and that kind of area. And we were blessed with an abundance of varying wildlife, especially many different varieties and species of our feathered friends. The beginning of our fascinations had been lost in the passage of time, but possibly an I Spy book or similar. Anyone else do I Spy books?
Oh, yes.
I do an I Spy book.
Got the whole range still.
Very, very good. So... yes, I Spy books.
Sorry about that.
I can certainly remember the level of competition we all felt at the time. And since late spring of the year, our competitive bird watching seemed to, if you'll excuse the pun, be soaring to new heights. This was especially true of Michael, who, perhaps making up for being the youngest, wanted to impress the group elders. He seemed to be totally focused on positioning himself as the group bird guru. He had even taken to showing his superior knowledge by starting to be able to recognise the different birds by just their song. Oh, sure, the robins and teals and the occasional nightingale were reasonably easy for all of us, but he'd started to hear some of the more difficult birds to identify. Oh, listen, he'd say, is that a yellow wagtail I can hear? Hark, a sedge warbler, maybe? Back off. Anyway, he'd chirp knowingly all day and drive us mad. Whilst we would often look sceptically at him, we were never in a position to know if he was being brilliant or simply just making it all up. Well, Father Simon, I can tell you, as this incessant unwanted knowledge share ramped up in intensity through the end of June and into July, it was still just about bearable. Then we hit the first week of the school holidays. As all children know, what should be a joyous and carefree time began to feel like a chore and a drag. The thought of nearly 7 weeks of this torture was too much. We needed to put a stop to it, and we needed a plan, and hopefully a plan which would also bring young Michael down a peg or two. After much deliberation, we settled on a foolproof way to catch Michael out once and for all. The next morning at 10:30 a.m, Dan called for me and we made our way to the old farm track where we'd agreed we would meet Michael. We had told him that we would be spending the morning trying to spot a kestrel that was believed to be in the area, but that John would not be able to make it that day due to some family event. In fact, unknown to Michael, John would be about 25 yards further down the farm track, hidden in the ditch behind some thick bushes with our secret weapon, a bicycle pump. As any person knows, Father Simon, if you partly cover the top end of an old-fashioned bike pump with a thumb or finger and then try to force the air out of the restricted hole, it is possible to make a slightly strange, high-pitched squeaking noise, which I think we can now reproduce. Here we go, a bit like this. Not really a squeaking noise at all.
Sounds like a snake. Isn't it?
Anyway, maybe it was a snake. Anyway, that was the noise. Didn't sound like a bird at all. We were convinced that from behind the hedge, the expertly operated pump would make the same sound as a rare and exotic bird. And we fully expected that on hearing the sound, Michael would name some random bird that he'd read about in a book. Then, of course, he'd be able to call John out of the hiding place and we'd expose Michael as a bird fraud. So just before 11 a.m, we were facing down the track to where John was hiding when we heard Michael calling out a greeting to us. As we turned to greet him, our plan and our world fell apart. Michael was not alone. Accompanying him was his 75-year-old grandfather, who was a true twitcher, a legend in bird-watching circles, and a regularly published author on the subject. He was a man who could easily pick out the rare scalp from a more common tufted duck at 100 yards. He was like our god. Dan and I stood speechless, staring at each other, then back to Michael and his grandfather. What could we do? Our only hope was that John was somehow telepathic and he could hear our thoughts as they shouted, "No, don't go forward with this prank," over and over. But alas, John was no mind reader. He'd obviously heard Michael's greeting, left a suitable amount of time, and then proceeded to produce his bike pump bird impression. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Squeak came the noise, which he then repeated twice more. Michael's eyes were filled with a mixture of excitement and confusion. "What was that?" he asked, his question firmly aimed at his grandfather. Dan, John and I were about to be exposed as the frauds and not Michael. In less than a heartbeat, this straight-faced elderly gentleman who'd heard the noise, he'd processed it, he'd assessed our awkward body language, had put all the pieces of the jigsaw together, he knew exactly what was going on, and then looking straight at me, he said, "I believe that's a golden oriole. Very rare and not seen in these parts since before the war."
Oh, he's from that part of the country. Right.
It just came out.
It did it.
Like
Not for
that.
Kish, that'll do.
Bluffing,
wasn't he?
As you can imagine, my expression of pure disbelief was absolutely sincere. It was one of those few times in my life when my jaw genuinely dropped. As I stared blankly at Michael's grandfather, whose outward expression had remained completely unchanged, I began to notice his eyes, which had a twinkle emanating from them, as bright as any star. He had not only seen right through our little prank, but in a single sentence, he'd elevated it to a level that we could not even have dreamt of. So our attempt to humiliate Michael had backfired, but it's not our young friend I seek belated forgiveness from, even though his school grades dropped dramatically in his hunt for the non-existent golden oriole. By the way, would you want to know what it sounds like? It sounds like this. Oh, look, it's a golden oriole. That's what you're looking out for. Actually, I seek forgiveness from the genuine twitchers who flooded into the area hunting for this rare bird. It seems that somehow the sighting had been mentioned on a local radio show, and so for several weekends and evenings we had a number of unknown cars blocking the village roads and mysterious men quietly wandering in the nearby fields with their binoculars. This forced the local farmers, in the middle of their busiest time of year, to erect temporary fences and signs to keep them out of the crop areas, and to those farmers I have to apologise. Well, you can see how it was a jolly good wheeze. I mean, what a legend the grandfather was. Played along. It was the golden oriole, which we can now all spot very easily, of course. But Darren did clog up the, unintended consequences. Bad time for the harvest. What do you say, Sister Bobby, who is always the friend of the farmer?
Well, you're right. Unintended consequences. You're right. What a lovely, idyllic, pastoral childhood you had. I'm really envious
Bucolic,
of that.
indeed.
It's just beautiful. And also Grandpa Walton standing there. That's the image I got. What a lovely
It was
man.
exactly Grandad Walton.
Absolutely. What a fantastic guy. I think this is a great jape. No harm done. I loved it that he threw himself into it. And actually, the kind of knock-on effect of this
your
with the
favourite
farmers.
phrase.
I know. Well, the thing is they put up fences. They managed it. I'm sure those people came. I'm sure they frequented the pubs and the sandwich makers. And I'm sure they brought extra trade to the area. So I think no harm done. And actually, this time, you're forgiven, Darren.
Okay, what do you say, novice?
Call me an old northern cynic, but I think Grandad was bluffing. I think he it was twinkle in his eye in all this. I actually thought he said, "I'll just say it's a golden Oreo. I think it might be, could be anything," and therefore there was no suggestion, but he actually knew it was a bicycle pump and a jolly jape. I thought a golden Oreo was.
There you go. I know. I think he obviously knew what was going on.
Really? I thought Bill, that snake sound that you had earlier on, I thought it was more likely to be that. I thought a golden Oreo was a winning chocolate bar out of Willy Wonka, so there you go, shows how much I know.
Yes, it does.
So, forgive him. Absolutely forgive him, why not? Didn't do anything wrong.
Nicely poised then.
I don't think there's any doubt here. Grandad was trying to show off, wasn't he? Grandad was obviously there thinking, I haven't got the first clue what
right.
bird that is, and I'm going to say golden oriole because that's an obscure bird. They won't know what that is. And then I'm going to tell all of my friends, and they're all going to come down looking for the golden oriole. And
is that how he spoke?
Talking about, well, either that or a West Country accent. So I'm going to say forgiven because it found out Grandad with his show it off.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Send in yours, please. You know you have at least half a dozen. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. And if you missed any of the Drive Time shows in the week, you can listen back online. Download them to your smartphone, tablet, BBC iPlayer, radio app. You know all that. Monday, it was the book club. Radio 2 Book Club was back. Barrister-turned-author Imran Mahmood talking about his debut novel, You Don't Know Me. Clive Anderson talking on Tuesday about Whose Line Is It Anyway, lining up at the Edinburgh Fringe. Wednesday was, legend alert, Roger Waters on the show talking about his first solo album in 25 years. And on Thursday, we specifically didn't mention the general election or politics in it. Not that we mention it very much ever, because that's why you're listening to this anyway. Instead, Nigel made us... It still makes me sad. Chopped raw hanger steak with mozzarella, borlotti beans and wild garlic. What's the point? So if you made it to the end of the last podcast, which is 2 weeks ago, I asked you to tweet, "Me and me mum and me dad and me gran went off to Waterloo." And loads of people sent that in. Thank you very much. Most entertaining. Thomas Toll, Michelle Robinson, Neris, Mark Gorman, David Crease and many more who did just that. You're all winners. Of nothing in particular, but you're all winners. This week's code phrase is 78-year-old scrum half. Thanks for listening. It's a blue sky ramp, everyone. It's the blue sky bit. And now all together.
88 to 91.